All right, so Professor Gilbert, we do it pretty much the way you want to do it. It's to your taste. As I told you, I think in the email, what's most important for us is that we just love to meet interesting people, and just to have our, just to get excited by a really interesting topic. So the floor is yours. I think what you told me is maybe a small presentation followed probably by question and answers.
Yep, I will try to squeeze that in 15 minutes, 20. I tend to present quite quickly most of the time, and I'm looking forward to hear more about your research. All of them sounds way more interesting than mine actually. So looking forward to hear from them. All right, so I'm just gonna share my screen.
Wait,
can I? Oh, no, I was disabled to screen
sharing. You should be able to do it now. Yeah, but it allowed it.
There we go. It's all good. You can see it. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So, all right. Thank you. So, try to breathe through the ethics of implantable brain-computer interfaces and try to explore what could phenomenologically go wrong. Just as a way to start, I would like to break the ice by talking about the mythology associated with implanting electrodes or neural devices in a human brain. And I will use this episode from Goldorak. Perhaps most of you are too young to know Goldorak, but it was a famous Japanese cartoon back in the 80s. And the main protagonist, Actarus, left his beloved planet and came here on Earth to defend our planet against the evil Vegas. And one episode, the princess finally is able to reach the planet Earth. And they're very romantic. They are in love. And suddenly, out of the blue, she tried to kill him with an iron bar for no obvious reason. And obviously, the protagonist is saved, and the professor then scanned the brain of the princess. Oh, and then inform her that, well, it's not your fault. You're not guilty. You're not responsible because from the beginning, you have been manipulated by Vegas. You were implanted with a brain-computer interfaces. As such, they have instigated, they were the inception of your action and decision. As such, you're not responsible. And again, this is just a form of mythology because that was back in the was designed sometime in the 70s, right? And even it was portrayed through the comics, the media, but it's quite deep into our society actually. And when we think about brain-computer interface, we have often the two interpretation of the utopian planet where everybody would be implanted, enhance, more performant, stronger, more intelligent, and all the opposite, the dystopian perspective where everything will be worse, bad. We will have various negative outcome from these neural devices. And even when you interview patients about the fact that they are implanted and what they are afraid of, and many of them actually report that they have concern associated with being sort of half human because they seem to feel like hybrids. They are self-fabricated by the technology, but they're still themselves. So it's a concern for them. And they have also fears that they might be distorted person. So we try to look into these intrusion experiences by the users. And most of you have a fair understand what is brain-computer interfaces. I'm happy I don't have to go through that, but there's different ways to define it. So brain-computer interface is this sort of umbrella under which we can find many different type of technologies, such as closed-loop devices, open loop, adaptive processes, etc. So, but we will also predictive devices, advisory devices, and etc. But I will use brain-computer interface as a big umbrella. And for the purpose of my presentation today, because I wasn't sure of the audience, so simply we'll define as a system or system capable of predicting and identifying specific neural patterns and provide a specific response to it. So in our case, these will be therapeutic responses. And so if we're back at this idea of mythology, we try to explore how BCIs are portrayed and depicted in the media and the news media. We conducted a study that we published back in 2019. We reviewed the entire ways that news media are reporting brain-computer interfaces. We have observed a clear exponential and increased depiction of BCI, and found out that most of the time they are positively portrayed, even with some enthusiastic attitude. So that these numbers are almost 77% of the time when you read about brain-computer interface, it is positive. And au contraire, and in contrast, you will find only about 2.7% of discussion about in the media about the ethics or the risk associated with it. Also, there's also exaggeration about how BCI will enhance humans, how also most of the 70% will talk about the future application rather than talk about what it's actually possible to do, etc. So I'm just going to skip these because I still want to talk a lot. So the ethics of BCI is quite vast, and this notion about inclusion, exclusion, how we can test that on some vulnerable patient, how can we articulate informed consent, the idea of obsolescence. We know that like smartphone, these devices cannot really last too long in terms of the technology. It has to be updated, and so if you are implanted with a device that will expire in 2 years, does it make any sense? This idea about privacy, confidentiality, hacking, etc. But for the rest of the presentation, I will try to focus on the potential impact of BCI on personality, identity, agency, autonomy, authenticity, and the self, or the PAI-AAAS. So, and as a way to start, perhaps most of you know this example. It's a famous case published in 99. She was one of the first human implanted with deep brain stimulation, which is an open loop system. And you can see the chronology of the segments. So you can see the picture A, B, C, D's. So that these pictures are a segment of about 90 seconds. And you can see that depending on how much she is stimulated, she passed from being depressed of being euphoric. And that was clearly in correlation with the stimulation because they repeat twice the experiment. But that was one of the first time that we saw that targeting specific area of the brain could actually generate and induce specific outcome or behaviors or emotion and feelings. And it's also a way some of these observations actually have opened the door to the usage of the open loop or currently closed loop in treatment of psychiatric condition. And when you look at the narrative of that person, so you can see I no longer wish to live, to see anything, hear anything, feel anything. I'm fed up with life. I had enough. I don't want to live anymore, etc. Some discuss with life. And again, depending on how much it will stimulate her, she will change her narrative, and to the point that she started to be flirty with one of the researcher, etc. And she can recall the episode, and these were not hallucination, etc. So it was a prominent article. So we also have spent time with patients implanted with open loop device, so deep brain stimulation. So we published these results in this article here, Miss Being Me, the phenomenological effects of deep brain stimulation. And we have observed that there's different ways of patient not recognizing themselves anymore after stimulation. So what we call self-estrangement, postoperative self-estrangement. So there are two ways of experiencing self-estrangements. The first one is a restorative one, which leads to some form of distortion. I will get to that in 2 minutes. But the first one is the deteriorative estrangement, when someone seems to experience degrees of powerlessness, of loss of control that have specific and common qualitative characters. So if we look at the narrative of that patient, so she said, I can't be the real me anymore. I can't pretend. I feel like I am who I am now, but it's not the me that went into the surgery that time. My family say they grieve for the old me. They say they don't recognize me. And so they mentioned that she's becoming too impulsive, seems to change her mind all the time, etc. And the other element of restorative self-estrangement. This patient, a morning was stimulation was augmented, and suddenly, after the stimulation being augmented, she decided that she wanted to see her husband, knowing that would take her days to walk to see her husband because she wanted to walk. Again, that was out of the blue. And finally, the neighbor stopped her, and then she explained the episode because she recalled everything. And she said, "Oh God, I wasn't me. I knew it. I wasn't me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I knew what it was. I knew DBS had been turned up that day, unlike the drugs which creep up on you, and you don't know what is happening. With DBS, I knew what it was." And again, this sort of interesting transfer of responsibility where the patient actually is blaming the devices, although that they are still have to decide, act, move. And it's interesting how there's this shift in accountability. And we have another similar narrative, a lady, her 60s, after stimulation, a sudden boost of energy, and she felt she was so young that she decided to lift the pool table, and then she ruptured her disc, spent time in a wheelchair actually, and then she said, "I blame DBS for that because I felt so good. I did something that I couldn't have done when I was 21, and I don't know why I thought I could do it when I was 54. Sorry, she was 54. I was in a wheelchair for two months." And again, there's also a shift on accountability and blaming the device. So now something a bit more, which is sexy in a way, these predictive advisory device, BCI, where we try to keep the patient in the loop. And these are interesting because predictive brain-computer interfaces are proof of concept that we can anticipate behavioral outcomes. So you simply need to train an algorithm to identify specific patterns, brain pattern, in order to antecede or obstruct, etc. So there's already substantial amount of evidence showing that this could be used for aggressiveness. For instance, if the device is trained to detect aggressive pattern in one's brain, then we could potentially use it in aggressive individual. Same with addiction outbursts or sexual urges, etc. So there's a literature indicating that we might be going toward these area. I'm not endorsing it per se. I'm just pointing that these studies are underway. And the study that you have read in the New Yorker was this one. So a brain-computer interface where it was implanted in the brain of a various patient trained to detect epilepsy, and the patient had to live with these devices. And so we're trying to understand the phenomenology of being implanted. And we found, I see time is passing already. So we found that on a sort of a spectrum, various and I would say mesmerizing experience. On the one hand, we found that there are radical distress experiences by some patient. Again, this idea of deterioration, loss of control, powerlessness, and the opposite, where there's sort of a symbiosis or hybridization, fusion with the device. And so patient 6 is this lady that you read about in the New Yorker. So or narratives, I felt like, then again, this is a clear, drastic, let me rephrase that. This is quite a rupture in her identity, but is a sort of restorative one, to the point that she became one with the device in her own way. So it's a sort of empowerment or embodiment effect. So in her own words, so the BCI was like an alien at first. You grow gradually into it, get used to it. So it then become a part of every day. It became part of you because this is what it did. It was me. It became me. With the device, I found myself. So change that person, who that person was. Then I found myself changing. So she gained confidence. Again, distort this is what a distortion, their ability and their ability and their capacities is quite common. We often see that. And the other on the spectrum, as I mentioned, the device again this wasn't a faulty device or technology. It did meet the therapeutic endpoint, simply that the patient did experience some psychological side effect, and to the point that she became depressed. She experienced a distress. She felt prior to the implantation that she was a part-time epileptic patient, but with the device, then she felt she became full-time, and it was intrusive, invasive in her existence, etc. So this is pretty tragic, actually, example, but it's probably not the last time we will find these results. So again, this idea of loss of control, powerlessness, and it's quite crucial to underline and highlight this. So I have two conclusions, and then we can start talking. Would be more interesting for you. So the first one, yeah, again, we have observed some psychological side effects associated with the implantable brain-computer interfaces. It's quite complex, but what we can say that if there's a loss of control, that is necessarily, well, not necessarily, it's most of the time associated with feelings of powerlessness. And if this self-estrangement are associated with gain of confidence, of an increased degrees of abilities, then it would be associated with distorted perception of capacities. And the other point, so again, even if we have technologies that work perfectly well, it will not necessarily guarantee that these will be beneficial for the implantees or the user. Yeah, I will stop at this point. And in case we have often funding opportunity in neurotics here down under in University of Tasmania. Australia still have their border closed, but you keep an eye or just email me if you're interested in these projects. We often recruit. All right, thank you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Frédéric. Exactly what we had expected. Fascinating. So many questions. The last slide is pretty tempting in Tasmania. Thank you so much, Joe. The floor is open. David, do you have a first question? I'm sure you do. So, David, maybe.
Like in several cases, maybe we're that camera anyway. It doesn't matter. So in several cases, you detail that the patient's experience changes, radical ruptures in the confidence level, and it's just like a television studio. Anyway, so my confidence level just went down. But is that due to like a kind of placebo effect based upon the mythology of having a brain implant, or is it actually modulating something inside the neurochemistry or architecture? Maybe PJ or you guys could discuss this, because I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I guess I probably both actually. So as you have seen, it's possible to induce different emotion in a human. There's various experiments showing that if depending on how and where you stimulate, you can induce these behavioral outcomes. So yeah, it's probably potentially somewhere in the brain that you can stimulate it, but also the reality is that with some pathologies such as Parkinson's disease, dystonia, epilepsy, you have to conceive that someone is chronically debilitated to the point that their quality of life is pretty low. So when they are implanted, they finally have some freedom or capacities, or they can regain some autonomy that they had previously. So with that opportunity actually boosts their confidence. So the patient 6, for instance, had epilepsy for more than 40 years and a chronic epilepsy. So she couldn't walk by herself on the street or drive or even having showers was complex for her. And suddenly with that device, the moment she was implanted, she finally was able to have a regular existence, not relying on any other person. This device was enough. So that in itself was enough to boost her confidence and give this distorted perception of I can do anything. And the ethical ambiguity here is that these devices may also learn patient into believing that they are into a safe place, and as such increase the probability that they may put themselves at risk. And we also have seen that with different types of technologies where we become so self-dependent on the technology that we forget that we are still vulnerable. And as soon as the technology has a dysfunction, then we sort of are experiencing the outcome of not, or I would say, to the point that we might become addicted to or over-reliant on the technology, that once it doesn't work, then the vulnerabilities are back or are increasing or inflated. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it did. Yeah. So you're actually stipulating that it's like a third category, that it's because people have been so chronically paralyzed or held or constrained that being given that freedom, they suddenly open into it. And your research also touches onto more pernicious aspects like the military. I saw a few research papers on DARPA-funded research. Is there any available material that sort of ties in with this phenomenological effect work?
Yeah, so at the moment, I was invited to work with some of their teams on the potential effect of AI on military personnel, especially via BCIs. So, because the purpose of DARPA, for instance, is to enhance the capacities of their personnel on field. So and we know that DARPA are quite serious. They obviously at the creation of many essential elements such as the internet. So we know that they're very serious. So they have been innovating the field. So we have seen many patient paralyzed patient actually being able to move prosthetic limbs. And here the idea is that they try to develop devices that are not necessarily physically connected. So it can be just wearable, a hat that will read your brain, and then you will be able to activate a drone or a prosthetic limb. Or they also have established that you can with bi-directional devices. So if you are implanted, you can actually move a prosthetic limb, but also if you you close your eyes, or if you are in Montreal and I'm here in Tasmania, I could actually articulated the prosthetic limb in Montreal without seeing it, but I could feel it. So they have shown that it's possible to touch the artificial limb and the patient implanted know exactly which finger have been touched. And now it's crucial because they realize it's better for the control when the patient actually have this lead actually. So and with that would come the many most likely or unfortunately psychological side effect. I'm pretty sure about this because it will associate. Well, I should not conclude that, but it would probably open the door to ownership. There's this question of where the body stop. I think all of us as human know the border or the frontier of our bodies. It's quite important to define ourselves as a self, as an identity. But when you can plug yourself to a computer and you can activate a device which is 15 hours away by plane from you, and there's probably will be element that people will be related, and this idea of ownership is quite crucial, and it's something what we have also observed with the BCI, where when the person fuse and becomes symbiosis with the device, it's quite of a trauma to be explanted, and patients have thought of that actually, that after symbiosis, the harm induced by explantation could be as bad actually as the disease itself actually. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
Oh, that's fascinating. Frédéric, could you turn off your screen sharing so we can see you a bit maybe better?
Oh yeah, sure. My apologies. Yeah,
that's okay. So I have a thousands questions, but who else want to ask a question? Anyone online?
Yeah, I have a question, if that's possible. Like Olivier, I have a 1,000, right? But I guess I would want to ask a sort of general one, which is I'm curious because in your presentation you gave us a lot of, well, I mean, kind of remarkable, case sometimes even a little bit disturbing, like as to like how far the technology has gone and how rapidly it's developing. But I wonder what it is that you think makes this type of neurotechnology a sui generis ethical problem, right? Like if we examine other forms of technology, it's quite possible to integrate them into pre-existing ethical issues. You know, we can examine them by like just the consequences they have on basic metrics of well-being, pleasure, etc., right? Or we can, you know, denounce them by, you know, whether or not they violate what we assume to be humanistic principles and so on, right? But it seems to be the case, and at least it seems from your presentation that you're leaning this way, and I'm sympathetic to this, but it seems that neurotechnology actually presents a moral problem that can't be integrated into the way in which we treat other technological ethical issues, right? That there's something unique to it, and you know, my intuition is that it has something to do with the fact that it poses this transhumanist problem, i.e., like what's morally problematic about it is that it makes it difficult to ground a humanism in any particular entity, precisely because it's in the process of modifying it, right? As it might be harming it or helping it, right? But I'd just be curious, like, just on your perspective, like, what is this salient link between ethics, neurotechnology that can't be reduced into the general ethical treatment of innovation and so on? Yeah.
Well, that's a tough question. Well, I think with artificially intelligent neural devices, we are seeing unprecedented capacities to predict the self, predict agency, predict authenticities. It's something that you cannot compare, which is unparalleled. Where I mean, people have talked about the revolution of the DNA, but obviously genes are quite important for us, but not as deep as a brain or your brain. But we reached a point where you know, this Socrates adage where know yourself is actually will be unvalid, because the device will know you better by the way it's predict you via different parameters. And I think this is quite unique. And again, I'm seeing unprecedented. So, and again, we have started to observe these with device capable of predicting epilepsy. And where the concern is for me is that patients stop listening to their own biology and start being dependent and over reliant on the prediction. And again, these are just predictions. Doesn't mean it will happen, but they reach a point where they stop, again, referring to their phenomenological entities. This is great because it in a way, provide more control on the biology, but at the same time, it's actually, well, you give control to patient on their biology, but at the same time, it actually increases the control on the patient itself, right? So it's a sort of paradox, and I think there it's quite novel and new. And perhaps someone could say we have seen that with something else, but yeah, but this, yeah, I wouldn't say that. Is it? Yeah, is it? Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's yeah, that's helpful.
Do we maybe want to read Day's chat? She's saying because I think So you want to read it, Dave? You may have
Might be able to summarize it shorter than what I wrote. My biggest question is based on the fact that patient 06 identified BCI as a part of her. Like it wasn't kind of a separate technology that malfunctioned or changed this person. It became a part of them. So I'm wondering if there has been any psychological studies that have looked at patients' like first perspective of the technology, like how they wanted to approach it, and correlate it to how they felt at the end. Was there any studies that looked at that?
No, we were the first one with these smart devices, and I think that work needs to be done. So if you have any will to do it, you should do it. Yeah, so no, it's quite important because, as you said, she certainly expressed a narrative that indicate a symbiosis. So symbiosis, it's a bit more than just a hybridization. Symbiosis means that both entities gain benefit out of the relationship. So in her, for instance, she gained autonomy, she gained from degrees of agencies, and the algorithm itself had benefit because it was actually so accurate that it kept increasing its degree of autonomy. Because that's the thing, artificially intelligent devices, they will increase and perform more autonomously by their performance. More successful they are, more they become more autonomous, and as such, the patient will become more reliant on that autonomy of decision autonomy. So this symbiosis is quite one of the first one described in the literature, but also it's indicated that it's more than the device. For the company, it was just a piece that was in the brain of a patient, but the patient actually became herself with the device, right? And when she was explanted, she felt actually, she did experience a trauma. She's still actually very harmed by this explantation. She was forced to be explanted. She refused, resisted. And here you can draw a parallel with the Blade Runner, when you have these replicants suddenly realize that, well, we are entity, we have feelings. Why do you want to stop us, for instance? Because few of them did bad things, but here she actually resisted, refused. She was her husband wanted to take another mortgage on the house to buy the implant that she could keep. Yeah, so it's a sort of again another tragedy. It won't be the last one, but yeah. So this is quite brand new, actually. This idea that it's more than just some pieces of silicone and some hair in the brain. It's actually a new person that emerged out of it. And this question about neural rights: do we own any protection to that new person that is created out of this interaction? Should it be protected? Can we force someone to be explanted? We know that we have a lot of law protecting patients to be implanted, and you cannot force anyone to get something in their head, but doesn't mean that if you agree to get something in your head, you still agree to get it out of your head. So when you sign, yes, I agree to get it in my head, it wasn't clearly articulated in the informed consent that she could de facto say yes to be explanted. And at this point, who actually has to run after these individual that refuse to be explanted? That's why I'm back to this metaphor of the Blade Runner, actually. You're not going to call the police, or the neurosurgeon is not going to take his car driving. So these are novelty, and it's interesting how the science fiction literature actually is catching up. We're catching up with it, actually. Yeah. But again, if you have interest in that type of research, I strongly encourage you to do it.
Amazing talk. Thank you.
Frédéric, go ahead, Anita. I'll go
Do you have another question?
Yeah, but it's fine. You go ahead. Let me see here.
I don't know where to look. So this is not an ethics question, but it was the thing that's, I only read the New Yorker article. And the thing that struck me was the patient who thought that the BCI became a part of her. And she said, now we together are one human. After it was taken out, suddenly she could predict her own epileptic seizures. And so I wondered if it gave her an awareness of listening to her body's signals, and what kind of research is being done, like just a positive of how it can actually train somebody to, okay, this is something to identify, because before that, I think she was just having seizures. She didn't know when. So, yeah.
Yeah. So patients. So actually, we have another case that we published in one of the. Another paper that I didn't point. Yeah. So some patient with epilepsy have got what we call the aura. So it's a sort of a feeling that it is about to happen, but it's only a tiny fraction of them experiencing that. And one of the case that we have encountered, this man realized, thanks to the device, that every time that he had flash of Kermit the Frog, Kermit the Frog, that was the inception of an epileptic seizure. So he didn't know prior being implanted. The device made him realize that he was receiving the signal after seeing the flash of Kermit the Frog like that. And then, oh, that's a signal that I'm about. That the device taught that. And in the case of patient 6, actually, what hasn't been pointed is that she actually taking a little bit too much of medication now. So she a bit anxious. So every time that she feels that she might have, she take the medication. So the good outcome is that they have found the right medication to stop the seizure, but the likelihood is that she is taking too much of this medication, because we're not sure if these signals actually are correlated. But yeah, these benefits. And also, this is a long story, but epileptic patients are at the front line of innovative surgery. So if you look at the history of brain surgery, from trepidation until the latest one, epilepsy has always been targeted. So from trepidation, with a rock in the brain back in the 2000 years ago, it was on epileptic patient. But nowadays, so what I'm trying to say is that these patients often are facing ablative surgery. So they have reached the point where they're going to chop a part of the brain. And instead of having this, they are agreed to enroll in these experimental trials. And then the good thing is that, sometimes we can find these elements. So yeah, often it's better to take more drug than having part of your brain chopped away. Yeah.
My question to you, Frédéric, follows up a bit on everyone's question, is you get these things, these devices implanted in your brain, and of course I'm no scientist, but from a little bit I know of it, is that you would expect it would affect I don't know, language, vision, all of these things, and it seems not to do this, only to affect the whole person. I find this quite bizarre in a way.
Yes. So as you know, the brain has some specialty. Temporal places, you can stimulate one place and your left arm will move, or fingers. So yeah, it's very, very important to not miss the spot. And also there's cases of you try to target the epilepsy or the Parkinson's symptom, and suddenly their memory is enhanced. You have a case, actually Canada was with Lozano back in Toronto. They were testing DBS on an obese patient, and they realized, oh, actually their memory is quite better. So let's test that now on an Alzheimer patient, for instance. Yeah, so it's quite interesting of where you're implanting, but it's also a fact that I forgot that the person mentioned optogenetics prior. Yeah, so with electricity, electricity is a sort of pollute, if I may say so, the brain, because it will go across different neural tissues. So instead of targeting specific neurons that do something good or bad, we're going across different tissues. So as such, it's polluting. So with optogenetics, the gentleman mentioned optogenetics prior. So you could potentially use light. It's way more accurate because you can pinpoint which neuron you want to affect. So we actually, again, there's more research doing in that way. So yeah, to answer your question, we have to be careful, because depending on the technology, you might be interfering with other paths in the brain, and as such, it might have strong consequences on the personality, the agency, or the identity. And last thing I would say about this is that with Parkinson's disease, often it's not clear if the personality changes is not due to the disease itself, actually. So we know that with or without the device, up to 40% of people with Parkinson would actually start to suffer from psychiatric side effect because of the disease. So the electrode might just simply increase the propension, or it might have masked it for a while, etc. Yeah.
Other questions online, maybe?
I have something to say.
I think Olive has a question too, and Salome has a question. So let's try online. Let's go Salome, Igu, and Olive. Your turn, Salome.
Hello. Thank you for a wonderful, very interesting lecture. I just had a small, maybe technical question. Is there a future for the use of Ulysses contracts in this? I mean, with the emergence of these new forms of technology. I think previously we were talking a little bit about, you know, if people change their minds or if there's a reason for something to be explanted. I know that Ulysses contracts are sometimes utilized in medical settings. And I've been doing some research with Professor Daniel Wickler. And I mean, I find it personally to be a fascinating subject, the idea of self-made contracts, self-made, and then you can have them be enforced. But I was just wondering if that was at all pertinent, or if there was space for it in the future. Anyway,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it is. Also, Jennifer Chandler in Ottawa, actually, I've been working.
Sorry to interrupt, Frédéric. Could you tell us what is a self-made contract?
Oh, there could be some degrees of self-advanced directive. So if you, for instance, if you get a treatment or a pathology, then you basically sign a contract with yourself in the future, telling you or your surrogate what to do if this happens, this scenario happens. So, and here with implantable technologies, if you are to suffer personality change and you're quite happy about it, it doesn't mean that the old person did agree for that, for instance. But so the question is whether who matters the most? Is it the person signing, or is that the person of the future? And I think this is quite legally ambiguous. My modest inclination would be to also consult with families, because there have been few cases of Parkinson patient being stimulated, becoming hypomaniac or hypersexual, and being very happy about it, but not necessarily the partner and the families. And there's a case in Netherlands, classic case in law now, where the person actually decided to finish his day in a psychiatric yard, and but without the symptom than the opposite. So it had a stimulation, or or you had. So long story short, yeah, there's a big land here, and yes, so it makes great sense. And again, my mother's intuition is that the person of the future should actually prevail. Yeah, because the consent is given not for the immediate, but rather for the future. But again, I'm happy to to be refuted here. Yeah, but yeah, thanks. That was an interesting question. Thanks.
Wow, that was so interesting. Igu, your turn.
Yeah. Hi, Professor Gilbert. So I was just thinking, because I guess with the epileptic device, we're implanting it in the focus of the epilepsy to recalibrate like the hyper excitability in the brain. So like to have it at the normal level per like the normal population standards. But the fact that the personality of the person changes before and after, it suggests maybe that personality comes from other places than, you know, the epileptic focus. So what the person experienced as self before the implant, like it feels like it has a lot to do with what's coming from the epilepsy.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, so identity of many of these patients actually is built up with the pathology itself. They can't see themselves non being epileptic. And actually we have found that was the same with Parkinson's. Most Parkinson patients that didn't accept their disease were most likely to experience postoperative personality changes. Actually, all of in our study, all the patients that did accept Parkinson's disease as being part of their life were all finding they didn't have any disturbance after. But also for epilepsy, with the focus, the focus of the activity, it's not necessarily correlate with the place of the personality, or often has to do with the integration of the technology within their existence. This is how it becomes fusional or symbiotic. And technology, depending which technology we're talking about. If we think the most common type now is NeuroPace. It's an American company where they train a device, a closed-loop device, to target the epileptic center and to actually disrupt it by sending electricity. Simply try to rupture that pattern. Actually, it's how it works. And then you have the double effect where you have the epileptic side effects of suffering from it, but also the stimulation. So we have interviewed a few patients, but haven't published yet anything about it. But it's quite interesting because they might be receiving too much stimulation, for instance. Anyways, but yeah, sorry if I say I'm talking too much now. But yeah, if I say, yes, it is quite interesting actually. Yeah, did I answer your question? Sorry, I felt I had many questions.
Yeah, but as a follow-up, I think, but at baseline level, in a normal person, their personality can change too. And like, I'm just wondering, at normal level of neuroactivity versus at the kind of pattern of neuroactivity, I guess, in epilepsy, it just feels like the substrate for personality is totally elsewhere. And BCI probably had less to do than we think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right there. Yes, we actually, in our paper, we always underline the fact that there's no direct cause between BCI stimulation and personality changes. It's an amalgam of different parameters that can lead potentially to that outcome. These are the putative phenomenon, right? Yeah. So no, clearly, yes. Yeah, thanks for the precision. Yes.
Yes, but then I'm just wondering what's happening to the lady who tried to lift a pool table.
She spent 3 months in a wheelchair. I haven't spoken with her for a while, but yeah, no, she was happy with the stimulation. It's simply, again, it's common. It's a distorted, which I cannot say psychiatric, it's a psychological side effect of being restored, actually. And then we see that not only with Parkinson, but across different pathologies. Yes. And to some degree, we are similar with our smart devices. We suddenly feel so intelligent because we can Google something, but we're just depending on a machine. So if there's no more battery or electricity, suddenly yeah. I don't have a mobile phone. I'm one of the rare human beings on the planet not having a mobile phone. I still resist. It's more and more difficult to be a human being without a mobile phone. Soon I will install my own YouTube channel about how to survive without a mobile phone. But yeah, this reality of we're not more intelligent. We're just more dependent on the technology. Similar with BCI. Sorry, now I'm a digression.
Thank you. Lifting a pool table, thinking you can lift a pool table feels like my dreams. Olive, did you have a question? Because I saw you turn on your microphone. Olive?
Oh, no, I think it's just like the accident.
Okay. Damien, you do have a question.
I do. Just a follow up to Amigo's intervention, which I thought was really useful. The interchange that you guys just had. I guess my question is how you would go about determining like the etiology of the production of selflessness or like lack of executive control after like the implantation of the device, because like we can make a strong distinction between like people after suffering all sorts of different events, traumatic events are commonly like in a psychiatric context, like you can produce senses of loss of control, senses of selflessness that are basically psychological reactions to interactions with their environment effectively. On the other hand, it's possible to produce feelings of selflessness or loss of control by actually directly intervening in the cognition or the type of inference that produces that phenomenology, right? So if we ingest like certain, psychedelic chemicals and so on, you'll immediately lose, a sense of self. And this is an entirely different mechanism than say a trauma response, because it's just interrupting the type of cognition that enables it to occur, right? So I guess I would just wonder, like, when you're implanting these sort of devices into people's brains, like how you would go about differentiating between these varieties of effects.
Yeah, so this question has to be linked with the type of technology that you're implanting, because some technologies are what we call passive, others are reactive. The other category is passive, reactive, active, and they generate different outcome and they play different role in the brain. So the one that I presented today were reactive one, and active and passive. So the passive will not necessarily be interfering with the brain activity itself. It could, but this is where you mentioned, where we touch your point of the environment being part of how one elaborate or build their personality or identity or agency. But what the concern is that these elements are not taken into account within clinical trials. So the company that ran this clinical trial, actually that company bankrupt, but at any given point, they never thought that actually it could lead to this sort of phenomenology due to the interaction. Yeah, so I think we need more studies to look into these parameters. This is quite important actually. And again, I'm repeating myself, but even the most expensive and successful brain device will not necessarily lead to the best well-being or quality of life for an implantee or a user, for instance.
Yeah, and maybe it's for the best, but I imagine that it's extremely limited the degree to which we can run experiments on these types of things, right?
Yep. It's also depending on the cohort of population. Some epileptic patients are actually are so severely affected that sometimes they don't have a proper trajectory, in a sense that they don't have the proper way to access society or education. So some of them, it's more difficult to express their narrative compared to others. And even, so I'm just describing the diversity of the cohorts. And even if we try to come with a general principle, we would probably need to break it down through cohort rather than coming with all population, all diseases, and all devices.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been almost an hour. Do we have more questions from people? What is it about Zoom and eating? This thing about Zoom and eating is something. Whenever I have a class or Zoom, at least one or two people are eating. Something with technology. Maybe it's the technology that's affecting our brain, makes us hungry all the time. Anyone? Any question? April, Sharish, PJ, Jenny. Any questions? No. Okay, so yeah. Sorry. PJ, is that PJ? No. So Frédéric, we like to sort of have one sort of last question, but we want to do it. Do you have a question? Okay. Well, so we have two last questions. The first one would be, I'll give you the two right away. The first one is one we ask every student at Building 21 when they apply to Building 21 is, what do you seek? And the second one is more a projection, is the idea of we're now in 2070, so 50 years from now, the world is a bit of a better place than it is today. It's not perfect, but it's better than it is today. And in your research area, the question is, what did we do right? How did we use these neurotechnologies in a positive way? So there we go.
All right, so we'll start with the second question. So yeah, I forgot I wanted to point at it during my presentation. So what we did right was that we kept the patient in the decisional loop. So the user had the ultimate power and control all the time. They were able to get out of the of the loop, actually, and this is central to and phase on the locus of control and user have to retain control on the technology at any given point. And I know it's a very tricky one because it's very invisible and invasive as well. And we can actually feel it via our usage of the computer. So if it is something implanted, it would be even more invisible. But so we have to make all the necessary steps to protect and guarantee that the user have the ultimate control on their usage. And what do I see? I want to be sure that the user and those who are at the front line of these experimental invasive brain technologies have a voice, that their effort and sacrifice to be into this clinical trial actually resonate, and we actually have to listen to them, and these experiences have to guide our policies and the ways that we are building framework to again ensure that we have safe and effective usage of these technology in the future. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Frédéric. That was great. Any last thoughts? I'm sorry? He said what he said. He said the patient's voice, right?
Yes.
I have a final comment.
Oh, Igor has a final comment / question / this was amazing comment.
Yeah, no, it's just like we've been talking about implants, so invasive BCIs the whole time. What do you think about non-invasive ones? Because that's what like I'm working on with a team. So we're trying to build a software. And so it feels a lot like the softwares that are already designed and built on the market, and then that people are using to the better of to the worse of their like mental health. So what do you feel about non-invasive technologies?
Yeah, so the subtlety or the market narrative or rhetoric of being non-invasive, it's that they are not physically penetrating some tissue, but as a matter of fact, they are invasive. So it's not because you wear them that they cannot actually access some private area of your brain and extract data and classify that data according to some bias, etc. So I'm not sure who are your colleagues. Perhaps you're working for a gaming company or software that will be used for different reasons. But yeah, so it's an illusion to believe that because you wear something and it does not physically intrude in some neural tissue, that it's not invasive. It's just a rhetorical point. But at the moment, as you know, these non-invasive technologies are less effective. We still have to get as close as possible to the substrate. And even down here in Australia, there's a stentrome. Perhaps you heard about it. There's this stent that you get through the vein and you get deep in the brain. So instead of damaging the neural tissue by digging or drilling in the skull for the neural tissue, so there's no scar tissue. So it's another way to get. So it's still an invasive, but it's less invasive. The subtlety of being non-invasive, it's quite interesting, actually. Yes. Thanks for asking this one.
So like sending an email would be getting trapped into the BCI loop.
Yes, yeah, because there's more and more work being done with reading the brain, reading the mind. And again, it's not, again, it's the adjunction of these other parameters and the combination of these parameters that lead to the prediction. So if your brain activity equal this. And if it is in conjunction with your location, physical location, what you have eaten in the day, your past X, Y, Z, and all these elements which are invisible, non-invasive, will at some point be the best way to predict your activity and your behavior, for instance.
I see. Okay.
That's why we might need more rights there.
Yeah. Not a clear definition.
Exactly.
So you're not out of the loop, Yigu. You're part of the ethical conundrum.
We're all in the matrix.
Yeah.
Yes.
As long as you're not in the matrix, I think we're good. Okay, Frédéric, thank you so much. If you come to Quebec, please send us an email. We'd be really happy to welcome you to Building 21, show you around, get you to meet with the students. It'd be a great pleasure, and I hope we'll be able to speak to each other again and also collaborate. We have a lot of students who are interested in these questions, Frédéric. So
yeah, please, just contact me. Always looking forward to get more collaboration. Yes, be great. Okay. Yes, and again, we have PhD opportunities if some of you are interested.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us from so far away and so early in the morning for you. Thank you so much.
All right, take it easy. Bye bye. Bye everyone. Thank you. Bye bye. Merci. Au revoir.
Merci.